Hey everyone, and welcome to Roma in Talk, Crimes in Plain Sight. This is our very first episode, and from here in Italy we're taking a deep dive into the crimes that hide in plain sight. I'm your host, Morris. For our debut, we're going all the way back to one of the most talked about cases of all time, the story of O.J. Simpson. We're going to break down the famous trial and the murder that divided a nation. We'll be looking at the evidence, the witnesses, and the verdict that people are still arguing about today. Ready to get into it? Let's dig in. Good evening and welcome to a special extended edition of Roma in Talk, and this is Crimes in Plain Sight. The story we're telling tonight is more than a cold case, more than a true crime tale. It is a sprawling American epic, a Shakespearean tragedy of fame, race, and violence played out on the evening news for a captivated and divided nation. It's a story with a cast of characters so vivid and a plot so convoluted that no screenwriter would dare invent it. It's the story of an ascent so dizzying and a fall so catastrophic, it defies belief. It's the story of how a national icon, a man literally celebrated by an entire country, transformed overnight into the prime suspect in a double murder so brutal, it shook the nation's conscience to its core. We're talking, of course, about Orenthal James Simpson, O.J. the Juice, and to understand the seismic impact of what happened in that courtyard on South Bundy Drive in June of 1994, we must embark on a journey. We need to immerse ourselves in the America of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We need to understand who this man really was before blood stained the sidewalk and a nation's belief in itself began to fracture. Because O.J. Simpson wasn't born a monster. For a very, very long time he was a hero, carefully constructed, meticulously marketed, and eagerly consumed by a public desperate for a feel-good story. His tale begins not in a mansion, but in a place very far from the Hollywood spotlight. To understand the crime, you must first deconstruct the monument. O.J. Simpson wasn't just an athlete, he was an icon, a figure who seemingly embodied the American dream in its purest, most marketable form. In the 70s and 80s, his was a household name, a constant welcome presence in the homes of millions of Americans, transcending sport to become a symbol of effortless success and charm. He was the Juice, a nickname born from his playful personality that perfectly captured the explosive energy he displayed on the field and his infectious, easygoing charm of it. It was a name that suggested vitality, fun, and power, all rolled into one. O.J.'s origin story was the bedrock of his legend. Born into poverty in the Potrero Hill housing projects of San Francisco, he overcame a difficult childhood marked by rickets, which forced him to wear leg braces as a child, and significant economic hardship. His story of redemption was the very essence of the American promise. A kid from the projects who, through sheer God-given talent and determination, ran his way to the absolute pinnacle of the world. His rise began at the City College of San Francisco before catapulting to the University of Southern California, a football powerhouse where his talent as a running back was immediately and undeniably spectacular. He swiftly became a campus deity, with a charisma that extended far beyond the gridiron to Hollywood parties and national magazine covers. His fame was such that he appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 1968 under the headline The Super Rookie.
Private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or the use of this telecast without the express written consent of the Miami Dolphins and the National Football League is prohibited. Kinney and O.J. are in the backfield. They started out with one setback. That was O.J. Didn't work out too well. They had to settle for the field goal.
A rare honor for a college athlete that signaled his arrival as a national figure. That same year, he won the Heisman Trophy, college football's most prestigious award, in a landslide victory. But it was in the NFL with the Buffalo Bills that he ascended from star to true legend. The Bills, at the time, were a struggling small market team, and Simpson became their sole attraction.
Every time he ran the ball, it was almost like the Bills' equivalent of throwing the ball deep. It might not work, but if you made a mistake, they would score.
In the 1973 season, an era when the regular season was just 14 games, he achieved the unthinkable. He became the first running back to rush for over 2,000 yards, a record that cemented his immortality in the sport. Sports writers of the day described him as an artist at work, a player capable of moves that defied physics, a breathtaking blend of speed, power, and grace that left defenders clutching at air. His style was one of beautiful, effortless evasion. He was known for his almost supernatural patience waiting for a block to develop, and then his explosive game-breaking cuts. It was a poetry of motion that made the violent game seem balletic. But his influence extended far beyond the stadium. O.J. possessed a magnetic aura, a million-watt smile that could disarm anyone. That smile made him a marketing powerhouse the likes of which had rarely been seen, and certainly not for a black athlete. He became a pioneer, breaking color barriers in advertising by landing massive endorsement deals for brands like Chevrolet, Honeywell, and, most famously, Hertz rental cars. Those commercials where he sprinted effortlessly through airports, suit jacket flying, became iconic. They transformed him from a sports star into a beloved mainstream celebrity, a symbol of mobility and success. White America in particular adored him because he was a frictionless, non-threatening character. Unlike outspoken athletes such as Muhammad Ali, who challenged the status quo, or Jim Brown, who spoke bluntly about racial injustice, O.J. meticulously avoided racial politics. He was, as he famously said, just O.J. His brand was that of the all-American hero who had, it seemed, transcended race. This perception was by careful design. As one New York Times columnist observed at the time, O.J. was reassuring. He didn't make us think about our country's problems. He was pure apolitical entertainment. He was the acceptable black face for white America, a status he cultivated and from which he profited immensely. He transitioned smoothly into a successful broadcasting career on Monday Night Football, and a modest but popular film career, playing bumbling, charming characters in movies like the Naked Gun series. By the early 1990s, O.J. Simpson wasn't just a retired athlete. He was a beloved institution, a symbol of success who had seemingly navigated America's racial tightrope with a smile, leaving the difficult questions behind. At the center of this carefully crafted fairy tale was Nicole Brown. They met in 1977 when she was an 18-year-old waitress at the glamorous Beverly Hills club, the Daisy. He was 30, a global superstar, recently separated from his first wife, Marguerite. Their meeting sparked a whirlwind romance, marked from the very beginning by intense passion, shadowed by a dark and violent undercurrent. Even before they married, the violence was present. Friends recounted incidents of his terrifying jealousy and controlling behavior. Nicole, young and dazzled by his fame and charm, found herself increasingly isolated from her friends and family, her world shrinking to the orbit of O.J. Simpson. After his divorce was finalized, he and Nicole married in 1985 in a lavish ceremony and had 2 children, Sydney and Justin. Their life in a sprawling Italian mansion on North Rockingham Avenue in the exclusive tree-lined enclave of Brentwood was the picture of a Hollywood dream. They skied in Aspen, vacationed in Mexico, and were photographed for magazine spreads that portrayed them as the golden couple, living proof that fame and domestic bliss could coexist. But behind the high gates and the glamorous facade, the fairy tale was a relentless nightmare. The marriage was poisoned by O.J.'s pathological jealousy, his volcanic temper, and his violent, controlling rage. Nicole's friends and family would later testify to her constant, palpable fear, a nervousness that seemed to emanate from her when he was near.
O.J. Simpson on trial for 2 grisly murders.
He killed her because he couldn't have her.
After 9 months of riveting twists and turns.
How about that, Mr. Fung?
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Calls to 911 from 360 North Rockingham were a recurring event, but the justice system, dazzled by his celebrity or perhaps simply reflecting the era's indifference to domestic violence, never intervened meaningfully. The police would arrive, O.J. would turn on the charm, and they would leave, often after he had berated them for invading his property. The violence reached a horrifying crescendo on New Year's Day, 1989. A terrified Nicole called 911, her voice trembling as O.J. raged in the background. "He's going to beat the shit out of me," she screamed to the dispatcher. "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." When police arrived, they found Nicole half naked, hiding and sobbing in the bushes, her face bruised and her body covered in welts. Her Ferrari was smashed and dented. O.J., still furious, screamed at the officers that it was his house and he could do whatever he wanted. That time, for the first and only time, he was arrested for spousal battery. But the system, yet again, protected him. He pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor. His punishment? Probation, 120 hours of community service, which he reportedly treated as a photo op, a $500 fine, and a $500 donation to a battered women's shelter. For O.J. Simpson, a man who earned millions, it was less than a parking ticket. For Nicole, it was a death sentence. She understood in that moment that no one, not the police nor the courts, would ever save her from that man. In her own words, documented in her diary, she felt trapped like a rat. She began to document her life in a diary, writing down the incidents of abuse, the threats, the constant fear. After their divorce in 1992, the situation grew even more terrifying. Freed from the pretense of a marriage, O.J.'s obsession metastasized into relentless brazen stalking. Nicole had moved into a townhouse just a few minutes away, on South Bundy Drive, seeking a sliver of independence. He would follow her, spy on her home with binoculars from a vacant lot, and burst in unannounced to check on her, often screaming accusations. She saved photos of the bruises he continued to inflict. She secretly recorded another 911 call where you can hear O.J. breaking in, raging, and smashing things while she whispers to the operator, "He's back. He's out of control." She told her friends, her sister and her mother with the chilling, resigned certainty. "He's going to kill me, and he's going to get away with it because he's O.J. Simpson." It was a prophecy of terror, uttered repeatedly to anyone who would listen. The system, the police, the courts, all had failed her at every turn. She was alone. On the night of June 12, 1994, the prophecy was fulfilled. The setting was Nicole's condominium at 875 South Bundy Drive. Around midnight, the silence of the upscale neighborhood was broken by the persistent, frantic barking of a dog, a white Akita named Kato, its paws stained with blood. A neighbor, disturbed by the noise, followed the dog to the gateway and made a horrifying discovery. Nicole Brown Simpson lay dead in a pool of blood on her own doorstep, savagely stabbed multiple times, nearly decapitated by the force of the attack. The violence was overkill, speaking to a rage beyond comprehension. Next to her lay the body of Ronald Goldman, a 25-year-old waiter and aspiring model, who had simply been returning a pair of sunglasses Nicole's mother had left at the restaurant where he worked. He had put up a fierce, heroic struggle. His hands were slashed defensively, but he was no match for the attacker. He was collateral damage in a war of obsession. The police report described a scene of unimaginable brutality. Blood was everywhere. On the walkway, the gate, the leaves of the plants, a testament to the ferocity of the attack. A trail of evidence was left behind. A single bloody leather glove, a knit cap, and a series of size 12 shoe prints later identified as coming from a rare, expensive Italian-made Bruno Magli shoe. By early morning, the LAPD was at O.J. Simpson's Rockingham estate. He had just returned from a flight to Chicago. The detectives noted his demeanor was strange, detached. They found a drop of blood on the door of his white Ford Bronco. Inside, more blood was found on the console and driver's side door. They noticed a fresh, deep cut on the middle finger of his left hand. His explanation, that he had cut it on a glass in his Chicago hotel room after hearing the news, seemed implausible and kept changing. Behind his guest house near the air conditioner, Detective Mark Fuhrman found a second glove, a match to the one at Bundy. It was a rare, expensive style of Aris light gloves, and size XL fit OJ perfectly. He was quickly named the sole person of interest. His celebrity shield was finally cracking. What followed on the afternoon of June 17th was one of the most surreal, mesmerizing spectacles in American history. OJ was supposed to surrender by 11 a.m. Instead, he fled in his white 1993 Ford Bronco, driven by his loyal childhood friend Al A.C. Cowlings, who told police over the phone that Simpson was in the back seat with the gun to his head, despondent and threatening suicide. The police located the Bronco on the I-5 freeway, but it wasn't a high-speed chase. It was a slow, hypnotic 60-mile procession at 35 to 50 miles per hour, followed by a convoy of dozens of police cars, their lights flashing silently. It was broadcast live to a mesmerized nation. News networks preempted the NBA Finals. Offices across the country closed as employees gathered. Around TVS bars became viewing parties. An estimated 95 million people watched, gripped by the unfolding drama. On the freeway overpasses and along the roadsides, people gathered, some holding signs urging "Go OJ, go," or "Juice, we love you." Inside the Bronco, police negotiators spoke with Cowlings, trying to talk a despondent Simpson down. For over 2 hours, America watched its hero, the man from the Hertz commercials, fleeing justice in what appeared to be a televised suicide march. It was the moment the O.J. Simpson case ceased to be a local murder investigation and became a national obsession, a media hurricane that would consume the country for over a year and expose the rawest nerves of race, class, and justice in America. It was reality TV before the genre even existed, and it changed the media landscape forever. The chase ended peacefully at his Rockingham home. After a tense standoff and a phone call from his mother, O.J. was taken into custody. But the trial, the real battle for the soul of the story, was just beginning. The hero had fallen from his pedestal in the most public way imaginable. Now, the question that would tear America apart remained. Was O.J. Simpson a brutal abuser who had finally made good on his threat? Or was he an innocent man, the victim of a racist police frame-up? The country chose its side, and the lines were drawn. The trial, presided over by Judge Lance Ito, began in January 1995 and was unlike anything seen before or since. It was a daily televised soap opera that captivated and divided the nation for 9 months, turning lawyers into celebrities and jurors into household names. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, presented what they believed was an ironclad scientific case, a mountain of DNA evidence, a relatively new and complex science for juries in 1995 that placed O.J. at the scene and the victim's blood in his car, on his socks, and at his home. They had the bloody gloves, the matching shoe prints, the timeline that placed him near Bundy at the time of the murders, and the powerful, undeniable motive of a long history of obsessive abuse and jealousy. But the defense's dream team, an all-star roster of legal talent and egos led by the shrewd, charismatic, and flamboyant Johnny Cochran, and including the pugnacious F. Lee Bailey, the smooth Robert Shapiro, and the brilliant DNA expert Barry Scheck, executed a brilliant and cynical strategy. They did not put O.J. Simpson on trial. They put the Los Angeles Police Department on trial. They masterfully exploited the deep, well-documented history of racism, corruption, and incompetence within the LAPD, personifying it in the figure of Detective Mark Furman. The defense argued with theatrical flair that Furman, a known racist, had found the other glove at Bundy, taken it to Rockingham, and planted it there to seal the case against a black man he despised. They attacked the LAPD's crime lab as a black hole of sloppy procedure, evidence contamination, and outright deception, creating reasonable doubt about the mountain of DNA evidence. It was a strategy of distraction and destruction. This narrative resonated with profound power within the African American community, whose deep-seated and historically justified distrust of the LAPD was cemented by the recent 1992 Rodney King beating and the devastating riots that followed. For many Black Americans, the trial was not about O.J. Simpson's guilt or innocence. It was about the LA Police Department's long history of brutality and racism. The trial became a national referendum on race and justice, exposing 2 entirely different realities in America. The defense's case reached its explosive peak when they produced hours of taped interviews with Furman from screenwriter Laura Hart McKinney, in which he used the N-word over 40 times and bragged about fabricating evidence, beating suspects, and wanting to see all niggers stacked up and burned. When Furman was forced to take the stand and infamously invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when asked if he had planted or manufactured evidence, His credibility, and by extension the prosecution's case, was utterly destroyed in the eyes of the jury. The most iconic moment of the trial, a piece of legal theater that would define the case, came when prosecutor Chris Darden, against his better judgment and against the advice of his colleagues, asked O.J. to try on the bloody gloves. The scene was tense. The gloves, a key piece of evidence, appeared too small. O.J. strained and struggled to pull them on over his latex gloves, theatrically declaring to the jury, "They're too tight." The prosecution argued lamely that the leather had shrunk from being soaked in blood, and that the latex gloves underneath were to blame, but the visual damage was irreversible. Johnny Cochran seized on it in his flamboyant, preacher-like closing argument, coining the simple, memorable rhyme that would define the trial. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." It was a masterstroke of persuasion that reduced a complex case to a simple, powerful image.
All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Kardashian, Mr. Bailey, Mr. Blazier. People represented by Ms. Clark, Mr. Darden, and Mr. Hodgman. The jury is not present. Good morning, counsel. All right, the record should reflect that earlier this morning at 9 o'clock, the court met informally with counsel here in the courtroom, because there are too many lawyers to go into chambers this morning, for the purposes of discussing notifications to the jurors regarding their rights of privacy and the interest of the news media to interview them or speak to them following the delivery of the verdict in court here today. The court distributed to the parties copies of the questionnaire that has been distributed to the jurors, and also the notice to them regarding confidentiality under 237 of the Code of Civil Procedure.
On October 3, 1995, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury, composed of 9 African Americans, 2 whites, and 1 Hispanic, rendered its verdict. In a packed, tense courtroom and to a nation holding its breath, the court clerk read the words, "Not guilty." The reaction in America was instant and starkly divided along racial lines. In many black homes, classrooms, and barbershops, people cheered, hugged, and celebrated, seeing the acquittal not as a verdict for O.J., but as a historic, long overdue victory against a corrupt and racist system. In many white homes and offices, people watched in stunned, angry, disbelieving silence, seeing a guilty man walk free because of his wealth, fame, and a legal circus that had manipulated racial tensions.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information.
The victims' families, Fred Goldman and Juditha Brown, were shattered, their grief compounded by a profound sense of injustice. Fred Goldman's tearful, rage-filled declaration to reporters outside the courthouse that justice was not served and that the killer of his son was now free to walk among us echoed the feelings of millions. The verdict laid bare 2 profoundly different experiences of America, and the chasm between them seemed wider than ever. But the story was not over. The criminal court had spoken on the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, but the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman sought a different kind of accountability. In 1997, they sued O.J. Simpson for wrongful death in civil court. The rules were fundamentally different. The burden of proof was much lower, preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, or 51% certainty. Simpson could be compelled to testify. and the jury would be predominantly white. This time, the defense could not play the race card. The dream team was gone. The predominantly white jury saw a stripped-down, less theatrical case. They heard Simpson's evasive, combative, and often arrogant testimony over 9 days of brutal cross-examination. He was forced to account for his time, his cut hand, and his history of abuse. He was a far less sympathetic figure without a team of lawyers shielding him. The attorneys for the families, Daniel Petrocelli for the Goldmans and John Kelly for the Browns, focused laser-like on the overwhelming evidence. The timeline, the DNA, the shoe prints, the history of abuse, without the distracting circus of police racism. The evidence was largely the same, but the context was utterly different. On February 5, 1997, the jury found him liable for the deaths and ordered him to pay $33.5 million in damages to the families. It was a stunning verdict, a definitive moral victory that provided a measure of solace, declaring in a court of law that he was responsible for their deaths. However, it became a Pyrrhic victory. O.J. Simpson largely evaded paying the judgment for the rest of his life. He moved to Florida, where state law protected his NFL pension and his home from seizure. He engaged in years of legal maneuvering, transferring assets to his children. The Goldmans, designated as his creditors, pursued him doggedly, a constant reminder of his culpability, but the financial victory was largely symbolic. The final, pathetic, and almost Shakespearean act of O.J. Simpson's public life came in 2007. In a bizarre and thuggish incident that seemed ripped from a Coen Brothers film, he led a group of armed men into a Las Vegas hotel room to reclaim sports memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him. The entire event was secretly recorded by one of the memorabilia dealers. "Don't let nobody out of this room," Simpson can be heard saying. "You think you can steal my shit and sell it?" The irony was crushing. The man who had famously escaped a double murder conviction was now on tape committing a brazen, stupid crime over some footballs and photos. This time there was no dream team, no racial narrative to hide behind, no Johnny Cochran to frame it as a conspiracy. In 2008, he was convicted on multiple charges including armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The judge sentenced him to 33 years in prison, a number many saw as karmic justice for the 2 murders he had evaded. He served 9 years in a Nevada prison, a fallen king in a medium security castle, and was released on parole in 2017. He lived out his final years in relative obscurity in Las Vegas, occasionally causing a stir on Twitter, before dying of prostate cancer on April 10, 2024. His death reignited the old debates, but the public reaction was notably muted, a mixture of lingering anger and historical fatigue. The O.J. Simpson case remains an open wound in the American psyche, a cultural touchstone studied in law schools, journalism programs, and sociology classes. It was a landmark moment that changed the media forever, birthing the 24-hour news cycle, the celebrity-obsessed talking head culture, and the true crime industrial complex. It exposed the deep and enduring fissures of race, class, and gender that define the American experience. It demonstrated how money, fame, and legal theatrics can distort justice. It forced a painful, necessary, and ongoing national conversation about domestic violence, teaching a generation that the charming public face can hide a monstrous private reality. But above all, it is the story of two promising, vibrant lives cut brutally short. Nicole Brown Simpson, a mother who loved her children and sought only to be free from fear, and Ronald Goldman, a young man who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time while trying to do a good deed. Their memories and their families' relentless, decades-long pursuit of justice and preservation of their legacy must remain at the center of this story. They are a permanent reminder of the devastating human cost of violence, the fragility of truth, and the fact that behind the media circus, the cultural divide, and the myth of the juice, there were two real people who were loved, who are deeply missed, and whose stories deserve to be remembered not as a footnote, but as the heart of this American tragedy. Some stories don't end with the period. They hang in the air, like the echo of a scream in an empty room, like a stain on the sidewalk the rain can't wash away. The story of O.J. Simpson is not just about a fallen man. It's the story of a nation that looked into the mirror and didn't recognize its own reflection. It's the story of a love that turned into a cage, of two lives ripped from the world with quiet brutality, of a courtroom that didn't just judge a man, but put justice itself on trial. In an age desperate for heroes, we chose to believe in what sparkled. But even stars up close are full of craters. And now that the curtain has fallen, now that the lights have dimmed, only the questions remain. And two names we must never forget: Nicole Brown Simpson, Ronald Goldman. Because the truth, the real truth, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers when it hides in plain sight. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crimes in Plain Sight, a special production from Roma in Talk. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and keep looking up. Because even the darkest crimes can happen in plain sight.